So before I start, just to give you a little background of why I decided to choose this topic regarding complications of diabetes. So a lot of you who are diabetics, when you go see your endocrinologist or primary care provider, or if you have a relative of a family member, you accompany them to the doctor's visit. I'm sure at some point during the visit there is talk about following or sort of encouraging optimization of blood glucose control. Like, why do we as endocrinologists and healthcare providers have so much of emphasis on controlling the blood sugars? And I think the main reason we do that is to make sure that we avoid complications associated with uncontrolled diabetes. So, with that in the background, I want to take the next 30 minutes to go over what are the possible complications which are associated with diabetes. And then I will briefly touch upon the class of drugs under the name of GLP-1 receptor agonist, which have been revolutionary when it comes to optimization of not only blood glucose, but also other added benefits, which I will share with you all. So this slide lists the different potential complications of diabetes, like heart disease or stroke, kidney disease, eye complications, neuropathy, foot complications, skin complications, gastroparesis, and then depression. And I will be covering each one of them individually. So, starting with heart disease. So, what is heart disease? So, basically, when you have narrowing or blockage of the blood vessels of your heart, you can have potentially partial or complete blockage, which can then lead to decreased blood supply to your heart, which can potentially be cut off, which can lead to a heart attack. So, that is in simplified version what heart disease can happen secondary to uncontrolled diabetes. So, diabetes is known to increase the risk of coronary artery disease, heart attack, or stroke. And it's essential that we take preventative steps early on in order to prevent these complications. So, what are the preventative steps? So, there's this sort of abbreviation ABCs of diabetes on target. So, what is the ABCs? So, the A stands for A1C or hemoglobin A1C. And that's basically a measure of how your blood sugars have been running over the last 3 months. I'm sure a lot of you who are diabetics have your A1C checked frequently. B stands for blood pressure. The ADA, which is the American Diabetes Association, recommends that a blood pressure ideally be targeted below 130 over 80. So the B is the blood pressure component is very important. And then C stands for cholesterol. So, whenever you look at your cholesterol panel, when you get your labs drawn, you will see these numbers or letters, so to speak. HDL stands for the good cholesterol, which protects the heart. LDL stands for the bad cholesterol, which is known to clog your arteries. So, we want to make sure those numbers are lower. The target is usually you want to target that below 100 if you, in general, and if you have a coronary artery disease or a heart attack, then you want to target that number below 70. And then you also will see triglycerides as part of your panel, and they're also known to increase the risk of heart disease. So then we come on to the kidney function. So kidneys basically act as filters. They are known to remove waste products from your blood. Whenever we eat, we create these waste products, which are then excreted through your urine. And if you have bigger protein particles or red blood cells, those have alternative ways to get released from your body as part of the detoxification. So, kidneys are usually uh, filtering out those smaller proteins as part of the excretion process. So, high blood sugars or uncontrolled diabetes puts an extra stress on the kidneys. We know that. And after years of damage, you start noticing there's leakage of protein in the urine. And there's a condition called as microalbuminuria. So, you will see that your endocrinologist or your primary care will order a test called as urine microalbumin creatinine ratio. And usually, if that is high, that's usually one of the first signs of some kidney dysfunction secondary to diabetes as one possible cause. Sometimes, when that is not controlled, you could have bigger excretion of bigger protein particles in the urine, which is called as macroalbuminuria, which, if not controlled, can lead to end stage kidney disease, which can then lead to dialysis. So, usually, when your kidney function has been compromised for decades, there is a decline in the kidney function. The kidneys end up finally failing. And you go into something called as end stage renal disease or ESRD, whereby then you're either put on dialysis, you get few times a week, or the other option is to get a kidney transplant. So, who are the patients who can get kidney disease? So, there are certain factors which can influence the kidney disease development, and they include either genetic history. If you've had a genetic history of some kidney disorder, you're more highly predisposed. If your blood pressure is uncontrolled, so high blood pressure is known as a risk factor for decline in kidney function, or if you have uncontrolled blood sugars. So, controlling the blood sugars and the blood pressure is necessary to prevent kidney dysfunction. So, approximately 10 to 20% of diabetics are known to have nephropathy or changes in the kidney secondary to diabetes. And approximately 43% of patients who have end stage kidney disease are attributed to secondary to diabetes. So, the end stage kidney disease is seen 12 times higher in African American population, 4 to 6 times higher in Mexican Americans, and then around 6 times higher in Native Americans. So, then we go on to the eye complications. So, diabetics are known to have high risk of blindness. Many of them can have minor eye disorders, so early treatment is absolutely critical. So, the possible complications related to the eyes in diabetics, which are seen, one of them is glaucoma. So, what is glaucoma? Glaucoma is when there is pressure built up in the eye. So, that happens because increased pressure pinches the blood vessels, which can then damage the nerves, and then vision can gradually, slowly get lost. 40% of the diabetics are more likely to suffer from glaucoma, and the risk of glaucoma increases with age and also with duration of diabetes. The next possible eye complication is cataracts. And normally, so you have a lens in your eyes, and normally, when it gets damaged from uncontrolled blood sugar, you suggest either getting cataract surgery. And we encourage our diabetics when they're going out that you want to make sure you wear sunglasses or use glare control lenses in your eyeglasses to prevent premature development of cataracts. So, usually, patients who have diabetes are 60% more likely to develop cataracts at a younger age compared to a normal person who does not have diabetes. The cataract progression is faster in diabetics, and usually they have problems if the removal of the lens or the cataract surgery, because they have beginning stages of glaucoma. So, because of the increased pressure, there can be increased risk of complications. So, something to keep in mind. So, the other complication secondary to diabetes when it comes to the eyes is retinopathy, which is changes in the eyes secondary to diabetes. So, usually, this is a general term used for all disorders of the retina. Retina is like a sort of a film at behind your eyes. And there are usually two types of retinopathy. You have non proliferative, and then you have proliferative. The non proliferative is the milder version, and then the proliferative is the more serious version, which can, in some severe cases, lead to blindness. So there are several factors that influence when you get retinopathy. So it is dependent upon your blood sugar control, it is dependent upon your blood pressure levels, and also how long you've had diabetes or the duration of diabetes. And in certain components, also the genetics play into role. And almost everyone with type 1 diabetes, with a caveat, those who are controlled might not have, but because type 1 diabetics usually sometimes have a longer duration, can develop proliferative retinopathy. I have seen well controlled type 1 diabetics who do fine and do not have retinopathy, but definitely uncontrolled blood sugars predisposes them to a higher risk of proliferative retinopathy. So then we come on to the next complication, which is the neuropathy or the nerve damage. And approximately 50% of the diabetics have some form of neuropathy. It's more commonly seen those who've had diabetes for a longer duration. And if you control the blood sugars early on, it can prevent or delay the nerve damage. So there are usually two kinds of neuropathy. You have the sensory motor neuropathy and the autonomic neuropathy. In the sensory motor neuropathy, which is also commonly known as peripheral neuropathy, you can have numbness, tingling, which can involve your hands and feet. In the autonomic component, you could have digestive problems, like patients can complain of feeling full once they eat, nausea, vomiting, or other GI symptoms like diarrhea, constipation. They could have problems with how their bladder works. It could also be related to sexual dysfunction, or dizziness or lightheadedness could be another symptom. Also, sometimes these patients can have heart attacks which do not present like a typical heart attack. Normally, you will have like left-sided chest pain, which can radiate to the arm. In such patients, they are known to have silent heart attacks, but they do not have such typical symptoms. Also, they can have something called as hypoglycemia unawareness, where there is loss of warning signs of low blood sugar. So normally, if you have a low blood sugar, you'll feel sweaty, shaky, tired, weak. And those typical signs sometimes are not seen, which can lead to severe hypoglycemia, which can be life threatening. You could also have increased or decreased sweating. And then sometimes you can have changes in the eyes, how they react to the lightness and the darkness, secondary to the autonomic neuropathy. So it's important again to keep your blood sugars in target range, as they can possibly prevent these complications. So make sure you report all these signs to your healthcare provider. And if you have, then make sure you get treatment right away. Make sure you take care of your feet. You check them regularly. Um, and if you are wearing appropriate shoes, there are special diabetic shoes. You if Some patients prefer, you should make sure you have good quality shoes or socks which fit well. And then there are, if you see a podiatrist, you can get like specialized shoes, diabetic shoes through them. I also sometimes tell patients to make sure that you are making sure your feet are not too dry or have cracks in them. So hydration is very important. One good brand of foot cream I normally recommend is called as Gold Bond. You can get it over the counter. So you could use that. So, what are the possible foot complications? So, you can have skin changes, you can have calluses, you can have ulcers. There is association of poor circulation, and in severe cases, it can even lead to amputation. So, what are the possible skin changes? So, again, as I pointed out, dry skin and feet. Um, you want to make sure you seal the moisture. You can use petroleum jelly, or as I said, the Gold Bond foot cream works just as well. It's important not to put the oils or creams in between your toes. Why? Because if there's increased moisture in that area, that predisposes to infections like fungal infections. You want to keep it dry but hydrated at the same time. Then for calluses, they occur more often and build up faster in diabetics. You may need therapeutic shoes and inserts, which again, podiatry can help with that. And calluses, if they're not treated appropriately, can lead to ulcers or which are open sores. Uh, and rule of thumb, never try to cut a callus yourself. Always make sure that you see a healthcare provider or podiatrist, because sometimes if it is not done correctly, can lead to infection. So that's very important. So coming on to foot ulcers, so every ulcer should be seen by your healthcare provider immediately, because if it's not treated appropriately, can lead to infection, which in severe cases can spread to the bone, called as osteomyelitis, and you might end up getting an amputation if it's not caught on time. So the poor circulation is also one of the causes why there is delayed healing or infection in our uncontrolled diabetic population. And in order to improve circulation, some of the measures which can help is, if you are a smoker, we recommend to stop smoking, to make sure your blood pressure and your cholesterol is kept in check. Exercise is known to improve circulation because it increases blood flow. So it's a good idea to get your exercise dose at least half an hour, 5 days a week, if not more. And then obviously wear proper shoes. So amputation is again a possible sort of um, possibility. It can happen if the ulcers are not controlled or taken care of on a timely basis. And usually it is seen more commonly in uncontrolled diabetics. And usually the reason is because there is decreased poor circulation, which can lead to nerve damage or neuropathy. So a lot of the diabetics sometimes they might walk on something sharp, don't have no sensation, not even know about it till they see an ulcer pop up, and then you want to make sure. That's why you sort of examine your feet on a regular basis. And amputations definitely are preventable if these ulcers are caught on time and treated appropriately. So, the prevention aspect of amputations: take care of your feet, always follow your healthcare practitioner's advice when it comes to caring for the foot problems. If you're smoking, please stop smoking. Okay, now we go on to the skin complications. So, these are some of the listed skin complications, and I will be covering the more common ones shortly. Okay. So we'll start with bacterial and fungal infections. So there are a lot of bacterial infections which can be seen in diabetics, like you have the styes or the boils, which can affect part of your eyes. And usually these tissues are inflamed, they're red and swollen, and they will sometimes would need to be treated with antibiotics. You could have fungal infections, which are more commonly seen in the feet. Candida albicans is a yeast-like fungus, which is the most common fungus which is seen in diabetics. Again, get this treated on time. And the name of that medical term for that is used as athlete's foot. So if you probably see these areas which are dry and little itchy, and can involve your nails and also the bottom and top of your feet. So, itching is also sometimes a common skin issue which is seen in diabetics. Usually, it's localized, can be caused by either dry skin or if you have a yeast infection or poor circulation. Occurs most often in the lower part of the legs. And usually, if you keep that area hydrated with good quality soap and lotion, then you should be able to resolve this timely. Then, next comes is diabetic dermopathy. So, as you see in the picture right here, you see these sort of brown patches which are commonly seen in the front of the legs. And these are secondary to changes in the small blood vessels. And these are like scaly brown patches, which normally they never open up or they itch, and they seem to sort of not require any treatment and are usually harmless. But if this kind of picture is there, this likely is because in the diabetic population is because of the dermopathy. And the staining usually happens because there is pooling of blood in the lower extremities. And the red blood cells have a pigment called as heme, and the heme is what stains the skin. So then going on to something called as atherosclerosis. So what is atherosclerosis? So that is basically thickening of the arteries, and it occurs at usually in diabetics at a younger age. It can lead to skin changes, and the skin of the legs can become hairless, thin, cool, and shiny. So when you have that certain appearance, it is secondary to this building up of plaque in the arteries or thickening of the arteries. And usually that can sometimes lead to an ulceration, which is sometimes slowly to heal, especially if the skin gets injured. You could also see some allergic reactions in diabetics, which can happen in response to diabetic medications or in response to insulin. So, if you see any rashes or if you see any depressions or bumps around the injection sites where you inject the insulin, make sure you inform your healthcare provider because you could have sort of scar tissue formation where the medication doesn't get absorbed. So, those need attention timely. You could also have something called as diabetic blisters. So, as seen in the picture here, they usually affect the top of your hands and below your around the finger areas. They can also involve your legs or forearm, and they resemble like burn blisters, and they normally are painless and they heal themselves within 3 weeks. And the only treatment recommended is to make sure your blood sugars are appropriately controlled. Then we go on to the eruptive xanthomatosis. So this is a skin condition which is usually caused in diabetics who are blood sugars are high. They are like these yellow pea-sized enlargements in the skin, and they usually are more commonly seen in young type 1 patients. And when the blood sugars are controlled, these bumps tend to disappear on their own. So then you can also see a condition called as digital sclerosis, whereby you see this thick waxy skin at the back of your hands, and it can even involve the finger joints. And the fingers can be very stiff. It can really involve your ankles and knees. And usually it more commonly seen in the type 1 diabetic population. And again, the treatment is to control your blood sugars. And then the last one is called as disseminated granuloma annulare. So it involves the trunk usually or the upper part of your shoulders. And this is this rash which, appears localized. And there are certain drugs which can help clear up the condition. So maybe a good idea to see your dermatologist, but also control your blood sugars. And then this is a condition called as acanthosis nigricans, which can be seen not only in diabetics, but also patients who have pre-diabetes or insulin resistance. So this is where you have this brown raised areas which appear on the sides of the neck, the armpits, and the groin. And usually it's much more common in type 2 patients or those who are overweight. And the best treatment is obviously that you control your blood sugars, lose weight, and there are some topical creams which can help lighten these hyperpigmented areas. So, the other complication is gastroparesis, which is commonly seen in uncontrolled diabetics, and that usually happens because of there is nerve damage to the stomach area, which causes poor muscle control of the intestines and the stomach. So the movement of the food is way slower, and in some cases can is stopped. So you have symptoms like heartburn, nausea, vomiting, weight loss. You feel bloated. The blood sugar levels are very variable, and you can even have spasms. And gastroparesis usually makes it very hard to manage blood sugars because I have patients who would eat a meal and then they'll bolus, they take their insulin before they eat, and their numbers sometimes are either high or low, couple few hours after. And it's because of the variability in how the food is absorbed, because there's delayed release or absorption of the food. And the slow digestion, which is secondary to this disorder, can cause bacterial overgrowth because of fermentation. The food stays in your stomach for longer. And in rare cases, it can harden into solid masses called as bezoars, which can cause nausea, vomiting, and obstruction of stomach. And in severe cases, can even lead to small intestine or intestinal obstruction. So the treatment of gastroparesis, the main thing is to make sure you manage your blood sugars. And insulin levels might need to be adjusted. There are medications which can help treat gastroparesis. So obviously discuss that with your healthcare provider. And then you might have to make some food adjustments. And in severe cases, a feeding tube is needed, which is very, very rare. So the last complication is depression. A lot of the poorly controlled diabetics have, because the blood sugars are high or they are low, that can make them feel tired or anxious. Low blood sugars obviously sometimes make you eat more than some patients tend to gain weight. So there's sort of a vicious cycle. Also, low blood sugars can wake you up in the middle of the night, so you're not getting a restful sleep, which can contribute to depression. And then some patients who have high blood sugars may urinate more frequently, so they get them in the middle of the night, also interrupting sleep, and then hence can impact their mood. So, with the complications now over, I want to focus a little bit slowly on, not slowly, shortly on the class of drugs called as GLP-1 RA. So, these are the glucagon like peptide receptor agonist, which have been revolutionary when it comes to management of diabetes, because not only have they helped to optimize blood glucose control, but also have helped with weight loss and added cardiovascular benefit. And I've been prescribing these drugs for the last couple of years, and it has absolutely changed the world, the way how we manage diabetes. So the clinical studies show that these class of drugs can reduce your A1C by 2 to 2.3% and by weight up to 15 to 21%. And the drugs in this class, in this category, are the commonly prescribed are like Trulicity, Ozempic, Rybelsus. You have the Victoza, the older one, the exenatide, which is hardly used these days because we have better newer drugs. So the guidelines recommend that if you're a diabetic and if you've had history of cardiovascular disease, that you should be on a GLP ideally, because there is data which shows that it can prevent future episodes if you've had an event, and there's also primary prevention which it can prevent an episode of heart attack or a stroke. Also, it is suggested to has been shown to improve results in patients who have chronic kidney disease. Patients who have obstructive sleep apnea have been known to benefit because with the weight loss, the obstructive sleep apnea gets better. And there's a lower risk of hypoglycemia when we use these medications. And the weight gain associated with insulin is negated because there is weight loss associated, or which is the added benefit of this class of drugs. Then we have this drug tirzepatide, which is Mounjaro for diabetics or Zepbound for the obesity. So this is a combination of a GLP-1 and a GIP. So it's much stronger than your Ozempic, Trulicity, Rybelsus, much more potent. It was FDA approved for type 2 diabetes in 2022, so relatively newer drug, and it got an indication for obesity in 2023. And again, this has been shown to reduce your A1C levels and also your weight, both. And this drug has been studied for cardiovascular disease, obesity, and even liver disease. So this slide is just basically shows what is the mechanism of action, like how do these drugs work. So there's multiple mechanisms of action. Basically helps to take your food noise away. So it acts at the level of your hunger centers, makes you more insulin sensitive, so that your blood sugars they're brought down. Also, it decreases your glucose production in the liver, and at the level of the skeletal muscles, obviously there is more metabolic flexibility and more sensitivity. So there's multiple mechanism of action how this medication works. So this table sort of shows the different classes of drug under this category. So these are the older ones. The ones highlighted in red are the newer. So you have the Trulicity, the Ozempic, the Rybelsus, the GLP-1 RA, and then the GLP GIPs is Mounjaro. They have FDA indication for obesity for semaglutide or Ozempic by the name of Wegovy. And for Mounjaro, we have for the tirzepatide, we have Zepbound as the indication for obesity. So there are certain warnings if you have history of medullary thyroid cancer or multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2, then these drugs are contraindicated. Then the adverse side effects, most common, the ones I see are gastrointestinal. Nausea is common. Vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, fullness, bloating could be some other potential complications. Although nausea is the most common, for the most part, they are tolerated pretty well. Pancreatitis, gallbladder disease, and in rare cases, bowel obstruction has also been seen. So I sort of want to end with the next few slides talking about how to appropriately use these drugs. So these drugs, when we start them, patients' blood sugars get better, they lose weight. So the idea is that not only you see this initial decline in the weight when we start them, but what do we do as far as maintenance goes? So right, so some of the patients are able to maintain on a certain dose for a long period of time, and for some reason, if the drugs are stopped, if the insurance stops covering, or there's a shortage, a lot of patients, when they stop, they see this weight go up. So, what can we do in addition to these drugs, which I try to emphasize for a lot of my patients, is also inculcate lifestyle changes. That these drugs help a lot, but we make sure we don't sort of minimize the importance of exercise and eating the right kinds of food, because when they are put together, the effect is not only more robust, but also you could have maintained weight loss. Even if there is some shortage, or if you're able to go off these drugs, you don't gain so rapidly the weight back. So the final thoughts is, and I like to put this cartoon up because sometimes I see this, like you have a type 2 diabetic who comes to you who is overweight, and you start them on these medications, and then, lo and behold, few months down the line, this is what you don't want. You don't want them to look, without any muscle, like a skeleton. So the important thing to remember is, when you lose muscle, 50%, or when you lose weight, sorry, 50% of that loss is muscle loss. And muscle is where your metabolism, right? Because it burns faster. The calories are burns faster, like around 7 times faster. So what we don't want is, we don't want to lose muscle when we are losing weight. So how do we prevent the muscle loss? So the muscle loss can be prevented by two main things. A, strength training is very, very imperative. I always tell my patients, make sure you do some form of strength training 3 to 4 days a week, ideally, and then have adequate protein daily in your diet. So those two things are very, very important. And then if you want more sort of knowledge on these drugs, I talk about them in detail in these two podcasts I have recorded, which should be available online. And I think we have flyers outside. So more than happy to, listen to them. I go in depth in detail about these drugs. Thank you so much.